Thank you, Heather. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this lightning talk about experimentation with generative AI and cataloging workflows. My name is Hilary Moore-Smith, and I'm joining you all from Princeton University Library. Through this talk, I not only hope to show you the process I followed to derive English language MARC records, but also to empower other catalogers of all designations and backgrounds to join the conversation around generative AI and gain firsthand experience using it in the cataloging context. One second while I figure out. There we go. There's a lot being written about generative AI right now. I'm part of an interest group on AI and cataloging and metadata services, and we have been following the cataloging specific developments and doing our own experimentation. Here are some of the key points to consider before experimenting. First, generative AI has a superficial understanding of cataloging rules. It can create records that look good at first glance, but are problematic when gone through field by field. Second, generative AI does not understand how to compose and apply Library of Congress subject headings. Third, as we all know, generative AI makes things up. In the cataloging setting, generative AI may fabricate the field's data when it thinks a MARC field should be used. Fourth, we don't know what the corpus of training data a generative AI tool has been trained on. We cannot assume that it has broad understanding just because it performs well at one task. I highly recommend the resources listed below for background reading and viewing. I will try and add those to the chat later in the presentation. As a cataloger, working primarily with special collections, oops, wrong direction. With special collections materials, generative AI, which obviously does better with electronic resources and popular editions, doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with my workflow. When considering what I could do to try using AI for the interest group, I wanted to focus on delegating tedious tasks that didn't require the constant application of a cataloger's judgment, and thought of my experience cataloging a personal library collection that contained a large number of foreign language titles. It required deriving English language MARC records from non-English language MARC records. And I decided to use Microsoft Copilot for this because Princeton's Office of Information Technology has made this tool available to the university community with enterprise data protection. For those of you non-catalogers who don't work with Connection Client, here's a little screenshot. Deriving a new record in OCLC Connection Client is a process that copies over a predetermined set of fields set in the options from an existing WorldCat record to your new work form, where they can then be edited prior to being added to WorldCat. In a MARC record, we have fixed fields and coded data fields that can potentially remain constant across records. We have free text fields that are either recorded in their original language because they're transcribed from the resource, title and statement of responsibility and publication statement, or given in the language of cataloging, such as physical description and certain notes. And we have fields that link the record with other established entities, whether name authorities, titles, subject headings, or other records. Others would have a relator term or a relationship designator to express the relationship. Connection Client can broadly include or omit fields based on the field number, but it cannot respond to the complexity in how to handle fields. It cannot follow verbal instructions. So can generative AI follow instructions, whether explicit or implicit? To start with, Copilot cannot directly pull information from the internet, nor does it have WorldCat memorized. So I need to be able to find the original MARC record for Copilot to derive a new one from. So I exported MARC records from Connection Client. MARCedit can then open the MARC files, allowing me to copy and paste the records into the chat box. Try it out, especially if you've never worked with records outside of Connection Client or your institution's ILS. At least with Connection Client, there is no minimum authorization level required to export records. With my initial prompt, I wanted to establish a baseline for what Copilot would be able to do on its own. I gave clear instructions on what I wanted as a product and the cataloging rules that I wanted Copilot to follow. I then provided the full MARC record. The result came back with 8 major issues. The leader did not reflect new record status. The OCLC number was still there from the French record. The book's language had actually been changed to English in the 008. The 040 retained the cataloging agencies of the original French record. Part of the title had been translated into English, as well as the edition statement and the Répertoire de Vedette Matière and the Rameau subject headings had both been translated into English. Additionally, while the main heading was indeed in the authorized form, the control number that was listed alongside it was from the Canadian name authority, and so it was not the Library of Congress name authority. And unfortunately, the narrative response that Copilot gave alongside the record did not necessarily reflect the record that was produced. Combined with its confident tone, it gave an important lesson about the need for careful review of all results. So this was a pretty low baseline for what Copilot can do with simple instructions and its training data. After 2 more rounds of instructions, some very specific, like correcting specific positions within the leader and specifying exactly which fields and subfields to translate and not translate, I got a record I was satisfied with. But iterating is time-consuming and inefficient, so I wanted to incorporate these learnings into my prompt to ensure that Copilot would not make these mistakes going forward. I worked to create a comprehensive prompt that would be able to be used for any non-English language record for a monograph. Rather than assume that Copilot would know the rules, I incorporated the rules as much as possible into my prompt. I used the same approach I would use for a normalization rule or transformation of MARC XML, just in plain English, focusing on including all possible scenarios. I gave instructions field by field and sometimes subfield by subfield. To test out the revised prompt, I selected 5 non-English language records. I chose records that reflected complete and accurate data, followed RDA rules, and contained Library of Congress subject headings, which depended highly on the cataloging agency and contained all the information that I would expect Copilot to include, albeit sometimes in a foreign language. The first record, which had German as the language of cataloging, demonstrated to me that sometimes Copilot could miss instructions in the prompt. I requested ISVD punctuation in my prompt, but my result came back without. But if I iterated on the result and asked for the previous result with the punctuation, this worked. The record had a personal name for the main entry and a corporate name for the added entry, and neither of those had Library of Congress authorities, so they couldn't be matched. For this second record, which is a Dutch language of cataloging, all 3 main and added entries were in their authorized forms, but I had to manually check this. Copilot added quotation marks in the 520 field for clarity, interestingly, and Copilot also included 2 6XX fields that fell outside the range of my instructions. For this third record, with Spanish as the language of cataloging, the main entry is in its LC authorized form, and the record would only require the adjustment of the subfield L of the 240 field. For the 4th and 5th records, both with French for the language of cataloging, we can see some inconsistencies in how Copilot follows the same instructions, such as when to translate a 500 note and when it contains quotation marks. The 5th record, however, posed a problem because of the length of the record, which exceeded the allowed characters and required me to split it into multiple prompts. Some of the common recurrences throughout, however, were Copilot's inability to understand cataloger jargon. When using 6XX to indicate all fields in the 600s, Copilot was not able to understand. Likewise, I never managed to instruct Copilot how to change specific character positions within the leader, even when explaining how the numbers of the positions worked. What still remains to be addressed, variation in authorized forms of names and titles requires some of the LC name authority files, some sort of access to these to finalize the record, whether this is through the cataloger or the generative AI tool. Cataloger jargon, like 6XX fields, indicators, or character positions in fixed fields can be a barrier to generative AI's ability to follow instructions. and longer prompts can result in uneven results. Iterating is more effective, but it is also more time-consuming. And what about records with non-Roman scripts? Romanization standards are established nationally. So what does it mean when you're bringing a record into English and using Library of Congress Romanization? What about crosswalking between subject headings? This may be possible for a machine, but can off-the-shelf generative AI do it? So how much time savings does this actually gain? At this point, the only way to get generative AI's assistance with records in OCLC is by exporting records. Fortunately, for time savings, records can be batch exported from Connection Client. But the limit on characters in the prompts makes it difficult to batch process records with Copilot. Can we attach MARC files? Not at this time. Cataloging software such as Connection Client and MARC Edit need to validate headings. So the cataloger in the loop will need to do more than just review, but also actively verify the headings. Here are a few of the lessons learned through this process, but I also wanted to reiterate what Dr. Lowe said in his keynote. As librarians and catalogers, we need to evaluate generative AI tools in our professional lives. Any questions? It looks like Carol has asked whether anyone has compared ChatGPT or Claude results to the output of Copilot. Probably. I haven't seen anything published on it, but I personally didn't. I did use Cataloger GPT to compare with Copilot, but I primarily used Copilot because, as I mentioned, we have an enterprise plan through the university. Someone, Auntie Maze has let me know that there's a way around Copilot's character limits. Upload a file that will ingest the whole record. Very nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Would that have to be, I assume, a text file because MARC files are not allowed? And it looks like I am at time. Thank you all so much.
If you have any questions, you can email it to us and we'll try to get you the response. Thank you so much, Hillary.